Hello, Bob Wells here, and welcome back to the Undercurrent Stories podcast, where we dive deep into the hidden depths of our world, one fascinating guest at a time. Today we're joined by a true pioneer of pop innovation, Bruce Woolley. You might know him as the co-writer of the prophetic anthem, Video Killed the Radio Star, but that's just one of his many achievements. In the late 1970s, Bruce formed the Camera Club, a band that blended sharp songwriting with the emerging synthesizer technology, and it featured none other than a young Thomas Dolby on keyboards. And together they helped pave the way for the synth pop explosion that would define the next decade. But Bruce's career didn't stop there. From futuristic soundscapes to orchestral experiments, his work has always looked forward. In this episode, we talk about the birth of the Camera Club, the story behind Video Killed the Radio Star, some of Bruce's collaborations, and what it means to innovate in an industry that's constantly evolving. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to the show, Bruce.
Hello, Bob. I think after that, I don't need to say any more, really. That's such a splendid introduction. I think you said it all.
Well, thank you very much. I hope I got all my facts right. I think so.
Yeah, no, very nice. Thank you.
Yeah. Before we talk about your life and work in music, Bruce, could you just please tell us a bit about yourself and, your life growing up and how you eventually got into music?
Well, I was born in a little village called Shepshed and went to school in a place called Loughborough. I went to Loughborough Grammar School, and my father was a jazz musician. He was a trad clarinetist, that's playing New Orleans jazz, and he was the clarinet player in a band. He had his own band, so I was constantly subjected to jazz from a very early age, actually, and I never really thought, and also I was in the local choir in Shepshed as well at the church, and so music was all around me, but I didn't really ever think I'd become a musician. And the school I went to, Loughborough Grammar School, was really quite repressive. I mean, it was really sort of a Victorian model. I was born in 1953, so by the time I was in school in the sort of mid-60s, that kind of, I suppose, almost like the vision of British Empire was still very much the way to go. The school had a kind of military kind of vibe to it. A lot of the teachers were in the war, that sort of thing. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is the idea that one would choose a career in something as whimsical as music was completely just not on the cards. So it was never really an option. But by the time I got into the sixth form, I'd realised that I really wanted to do something with the electric guitar, and that was a sort of turning point. Listening to Led Zeppelin on a stereo at my friend's house was very much a turning point. Whole Lot of Love, by the way, was the track that changed my life. So yeah, I suppose I grew up in quite a sheltered, and school was repressive, and the only way out for me was to actually rebel. And the guitar was that portal, if you like. That was the way through for me.
And did you take lessons for the guitar, or was it just something that you picked up and learnt yourself, Bruce?
No, I didn't really. I sort of taught myself to play, and because I suppose the nature of music changed with rock and roll. In other words, if you went back a generation, you had to play the guitar. You might be listening to Segovia, who was a great classical player, for example. And you would have to learn to read music and all of these things. But I think what rock did, and then particularly later on with punk, it allowed people very much to adopt a DIY approach. And I think listening to groups like the Stones and even actually I thank my father for this, Muddy Waters, listening to early blues made me realise that I didn't have to learn to read music. I didn't have to be particularly fluent in musical theory or even know that many chords to start making a sound. So no, I'm sort of self-taught, as it were.
And what about the singing? Did you find that you naturally had an aptitude for singing whilst you were playing the guitar?
Well, originally I mentioned going to the choir, but that was a sort of it was a church choir, and I liked the atmosphere, and I enjoyed singing, and I got paid as well, and there were girls, so they had a lot going for it. But I never considered singing in pop music but necessarily. And I actually, with the guitar, was more interested in becoming a jazz rock guitarist, and listening to John McLaughlin, the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and people who were very technically kind of forward. And I've said this before, the problem is that with the guitar, the jazz rock guitarist plays 3,000 chords in front of three people, whereas the rock guitarist plays three chords in front of 3,000 people.
Yeah.
And that began to dawn on me after I'd left school and I was doing hard labor for a living. I wasn't in prison. I was doing kind of laboring jobs to earn a living.
Yeah.
And trying to puzzle it all out, trying to think, I really love music. I love playing the guitar. How am I going to progress? Because I wasn't really good enough as a jazz rock guitarist. So I kind of hit upon the idea of writing a pop song, and I had no one to sing the pop song, so I sang it myself. And that's really how it began. I started singing my own demos of my own songs and recording them. The technology was very primitive, quite a simple reel-to-reel tape recorder that you could bounce one channel to the next. So in other words, a very primitive form of multi-tracking was possible. And so I was singing my demos, and to cut a long story short, I got a publishing deal based on these very primitive tapes, and that allowed me to move to London. And that's when the singing really became a kind of a bit more of a vocation, a bit more of a calling, but it was quite late in life, really.
Yes.
By then.
And did you play in sort of bands at school? Before the Camera Club? Did you have a number of bands that you were in?
Yeah, well, we had a band. We had a band in the sixth form, but we had a singer. It never occurred to me to sing. I was still at that point very interested in emulating my rock guitar heroes, people like Jimmy Page, of course, and Jan Ackerman from a group called Focus.
Oh, yeah.
Quite brilliant sort of, actually, excuse me, they never really succeeded much in America because people apparently used to go to their concerts and shout, play some rock and roll, because it was too arty for them. Anyway, I'm digressing slightly. So all I was interested in was playing the guitar until we made these demos, and the rest followed on. But I was always very into playing with bands, yeah, and that started at school. And then even after that, I had to try and earn a living. I did a lot of cover band music, which is where you play other people's songs. So there's a working men's club scene in Leicester, for example, and there was also a Mecca circuit, which was quite sophisticated for its day kind of system of dance bands mixing with discos in a club, very well paid. And I managed to get a job doing that. But that was really the turning point, and that allowed me to spend time writing the songs. So, it was, always playing with musicians, always interested in bands, and that interaction with other musicians. I think it's very stimulating. It really, I think, shaped the way music evolved to this day. It's less so now, of course, so this is almost another subject. But I've always been into playing with other musicians.
It's interesting, isn't it? I play the guitar, and yes, and I was in a lot of bands at school, and I always found that when I was playing with other people, the learning went like that. It just went up because you were forced to, perform better than what you had been, and that little bit of pressure certainly for me helped. Yeah,
absolutely. And I suppose, can I use the word osmosis? I mean, you're just in a room with other guys. And also that playing, you know what I'm talking about, because you could say, let's say you're reacting to a drummer who
Yeah.
you may not know what he's going to do next. I'm not quite sure what kind of material you were playing, but even if you're
Rock.
doing rock,
Yeah.
great. So that the sort of it's an overused word, but chemistry it's indefinable. It's
Yeah.
you can't you can't really pin it down at all, and so things happen when you're in a group of musicians, and you obviously know that from personal experience. When you say rock, may I ask what kind of rock?
Yeah, it was basic stuff that was around in the sort of mid-70s. So Alex Harvey Band, Thin
Hmm.
Lizzy, T-Rex, Status Quo, Robin Trower,
Yeah,
to name but a few. And while you were talking there, I was thinking that osmosis, and particularly, you feel the air come out the bass drum,
yes.
and it gives you that real buzz. Fantastic stuff.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah,
it's.
yeah,
I mean, I suppose it's sort of fast forward to now, and we look at, say, the because I probably I ought to know what's number one in the charts, and there was a time when everybody knew what was number one in the charts. My father knew what was number one in the charts. It was probably Gary Glitter or something, but at least people knew because you had Top of the Pops, and there was a sort of the whole channel system was so limited compared to how it is now. So,
yes,
but I think what I'm trying to say is I heard some statistic on the radio recently which said that there literally aren't any new bands in the charts anymore, and there probably haven't been even any new bands breaking into the mainstream music scene for 10 years, maybe, possibly longer. And this is because I think it's so much easier to make music on a computer. Anyone now can make music, anyone can make a track, and it can sound really good because you've got access to so many tools with samples and libraries and so on and so forth that you don't even have to play an instrument at all or meet another musician,
no,
which is, of course, something of a sad loss, but there we go. That's what happens with technology, isn't it? It changes things
yeah,
sociologically.
yes.
So I think it's a pity in a way that more people don't get together to make music in group situations. And of course, it's challenging because you're going back to that drummer's bass drum or the guitarist that won't stop twiddling in between numbers, or sorry, the drummer that won't stop hitting his drums in between numbers while you're trying to have a conversation.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
level of irritation is quite profound. But
Yeah, I don't know about you, Bruce, but I found over the years I've made friends through music, and particularly at school, it was sort of intertwined with your social life.
absolutely, yeah. In fact, I'm still in touch with the guitarist from my sixth form band. In fact, we've been threatening to reform. How many years would it be now? 1969 when we
Wow.
formed. So, and we're still very good friends. And that you're right. Those bonds that you form, and also I think musicians have their own kind of sense of humor,
Yeah,
um, and yeah, I don't mean to make that sound a little bit elitist, but I think if you do play a musical instrument and you know somebody, you have a sort of an understanding. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I know exactly what you mean about the humour. I mean, some of the stories. I remember we were in this school band and we played a hotel near Heathrow Airport,
Mm.
and it was an absolute disaster of a gig. We were using old amplifiers and stuff, and my guitar amplifier started picking up ground control, and the place absolutely erupted in laughter. But you look back now, it was amusing. But as a sort of 15-year-old kid,
Wow.
it was terrible, but great. So you moved to London, and I guess that's where the Camera Club started off, was it?
Yes, I mean originally I was signed as a songwriter to this kind of Tin Pan Alley type setup, where I actually met Trevor Horn, and I met a lot of musicians through that publishing company. And when that folded, which it did, because Trevor ran up such huge studio bills in his quest to learn to be the greatest record producer in the world, which of course he achieved in the end, but at the expense of the publishing company's budget, unfortunately. So we were all out on our ear, as it were, and we were completely broke. And I just didn't know what to do. And I was watching some music program, and I saw this group called the Cars. And I also saw a guy called Robert Johnson, who was not to be confused with the blues Robert Johnson, but he had a 3-piece. Robert Johnson.
I had his album.
Oh, you had it. So you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know exactly. Yeah, quite eclectic.
Very and quite obscure, I think, in the history books. I mean, I think you're the first person that I've actually spoken to that knows who I'm talking about and has got the album.
Yeah.
But he had this great 3-piece, and he kind of wore these big glasses, and it was all stripped down. It was very minimal and 4 on the floor, quite sort of contemporary sounding. And I thought, well, maybe I could do something like that, kind of hybrid in some of his tracks, sort of almost hybrid of dance music and rock with a punk new wave kind of veneer, if you like. And he was a bit older, and I thought, he's somehow got a bit of a formula going here, and I can see how he's doing it. I really liked it. I thought I'd try and do something similar. And I met up with Dave Birch, who, again, back to the grammar school, I was going out with his sister in the sixth form. There was a girls' school next to our boys' school, and I knew Dave. And he moved down to London, and he became the guitarist with a group called the Vibrators.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah, and the Vibrators split up, but he also knew the drummer from the Motors, who had a couple of hit singles, and they'd split up. And Dave and I got together with this drummer, Richard Wernham, a.k.a. Ricky Slaughter. That was his actual... his punk name. And I don't know what's become of him. He was an amazing drummer. And the three of us just had a jam, and it was just fantastic. And this was, at the time, punk was still very alive in London, and it was morphing into new wave. But there were loads of clubs, loads of pubs you could play. A very vibrant, well, in fact, it became known as pub rock in some instances. I think the Melody Maker came up with the term pub rock. So it was a scene. And we kind of tapped into it, and it was a huge amount of fun. And we managed to get a deal. We got a bass player, and we got a deal with CBS Records. So that's when it began. We had a budget for the first time. Could pay everybody as well, which was good. So the musicians were on retainers, which was nice. And so in those days, they liked it if you played live, because it was a sort of major form of promotion. There was no MTV in those days. Videos hardly existed. So that's it. That's how it kind of began, really, quite organically.
And that's when Thomas Dolby joined, was it?
That's right. Yeah, Thomas. Yeah. I'd met Thomas through the back pages of the Melody Maker. He was a songwriter looking for a partner, and we'd actually originally got together to see if we could work together. And the sort of the afternoon, it was very pleasant. He came over to my flat in East Sheen, and we had tea, and at the end of it we said, well, we can't really work together, can we? So it was nice meeting you. And off he went, but I'd met him and I'd remembered him. And so when I got the Camera Club sort of started and I knew I had a budget, I rang him up and said, look, it's all changed. I've got a band. Would you like to be the keyboard player? And we can pay you. So he came down to the rehearsal room, and he was great. He was really, really good. He was called Thomas Robertson, by the way. At that point, that was his real name. So Thomas Robertson was our keyboard player.
Yeah.
And of course, there's Tom Robinson, the famous now DJ on Radio 6, and he knew Tom Robertson. So the two Toms knew each other. and their names were so similar. They went for a drink one night and formed a pact, and they said, "Look, whoever gets famous first has to change the other one has to change their name." So of course Tom Robinson was like in the charts with the 5 4 3 2 1 motorway or whatever it was called.
Yeah.
And Tom Robertson came into the rehearsal room and said, "Yeah, I'm going to change my name." So we said, "Oh yeah, okay, what are you going to call yourself?" He said, Thomas Dolby, and we just fell about laughing. But of course, he was deadly serious, and the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, it was a word that was coming in at that time, wasn't it, Dolby, with music and stereos and stuff like that.
Yes, because Ray Dolby had invented a noise reduction system, which was like a patented system to kind of get rid of hiss on tapes and so forth. Yeah. And it was adopted by every record label in the world, I think. The guy made an absolute fortune. So every cassette in those days that you bought in those days had the word Dolby on it. My mother thought that there were lots of records by Thomas Dolby because she kept seeing his name on the tape. Oh, I've seen another record with Thomas Dolby on it. You know,
it looks like a wise move in hindsight.
Yes, well, it of course it resonated, and however, he did get into trouble a bit later on when he became super famous in America. Ray Dolby, whose son is called Thomas, decided to sue Tom over his name. And, you got to change your name. You can't be called Thomas Dolby. That's my son's name, and I'm Ray Dolby. You know, I mean, obviously he hadn't done anything illegal. No. Therefore, there was a court case. And I think what happened in the end was that it was agreed that Tom Dolby could carry on with his musical name as providing he didn't make any musical products.
Okay.
In other words, so he didn't get into because if you get into copyright and trademarking, it's all about categories and so forth.
Yeah. And I guess it would have been by association with, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Hi, it's Bob here, just a quick interlude. Hope you're enjoying this episode, and if you would like to hear more interesting interviews, we have over 120 episodes to date with many fascinating guests talking about a wide variety of topics which include music, history, philosophy, fitness, food and drink, adventure, contemporary culture, and many, many more. I'm sure there's something that you'd really enjoy. So all you need to do is just visit undercurrentstories.com or search Undercurrent Stories in any of the podcast platforms. And now back to the show. And your songwriting, I'm assuming that you were the main songwriter in the Camera Club.
Yes, I was actually, and I managed to write. Well, one of the things that had been bubbling away was I'd started songwriting kind of 10 years before, really, almost. So I had a bit of a backlog. I had a lot of ideas. So I was able to actually generate a lot of the songs myself. Although I always felt more comfortable co-writing if I could work with a good lyricist. And that was where I felt that the strongest material came from collaboration. Although I was quite proud of some of the songs I'd written by myself, but they'd taken a long time to write.
So I was going to ask you, you then felt that the strong point for yourself were the melodies?
Yes, definitely.
As opposed to the words?
And that's still the case. When I look back and with this, we've just released a 69-track compilation on Cherry Red Records. And when I listen back to some of these songs, I have to hide behind the sofa because it's a bit cringe, I think is the word. My lyric writing is limited, and I acknowledge that. So it's much better if I can work with a lyricist who knows what they're doing, because lyric writing, anyone can write a lyric. I can write a lyric. But somehow to come up with something good that's original, and incidentally, it still amazes me that people can still come up with song titles that have never been, written before.
Yeah,
a good lyricist is doing it instinctively. It's a gift. It's a talent. Yes. It's an absolute gift. So yeah, I'm more melody person.
Okay, so it would be like Elton and Bernie.
Yes, very much. In
Each
fact,
has got their own strong point.
absolutely. And I think with Elton, I think Bernie writes the lyrics and puts them in the post almost, sends them to Elton. They don't sit down together, or at least that was my understanding. Literally, Bernie gives Elton a fait accompli, gives him the lyric, and then Elton springs off from there. And I worked with a few lyricists like that, and I found it incredibly satisfying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just before I moved to London, I'd met with a guy who could just write lyrics. That's all he could do. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but he was the sort of turning point for me with songwriting. Made me realize that, yeah, this is another job, really, writing the words.
And in terms of your process in writing a song, how does it work? Do you get do you wake up in the middle of the night with inspiration? Do you see the lyrics and mull over them for a while? How does it work?
I can honestly, Bob, it can work any way. Like someone can give me a sheet of lyrics and I can then write a tune to it. Or I could even come up with a title maybe and go to someone and say, look, I've got a bit of a tune, maybe a title, and I'll hum you the tune. Can you write the lyrics to it?
Oh, wow.
So it can really work both ways.
Yeah.
I think actually the latter method is probably the most common way that I've worked. People don't know, but Trevor Horn is a great producer, that he is also an incredibly good lyric writer. So we can get together in the room and I can play him a tune and lyrics will just appear. I mean, it's like magic. They just appear out of the blue. And I think that's certainly probably the most fun way of writing.
And in terms of the tunes coming to you, do you sort of have them in your head, or do you use a keyboard or guitar as well?
Keyboard and guitar. I think generally. Sometimes, yes. I mean, I've got hundreds of voice memos where I've had too much to drink and I'm singing to the telephone. Nobody wants to hear those. But occasionally something comes out. They're usually quite derivative. But the best way, I think, is to be at an instrument and to be singing or playing a tune. That's how it happens for me. Mostly on piano, actually. That's my. Although I've written a lot on guitar, the piano is the most versatile instrument for writing for me.
Can you tell us about Video Killed the Radio Star? I guess it's something that you asked very often, and probably that one question that everybody asked. But could you just tell us a bit about the background, about how you wrote that song?
Well, the background is quite well documented. Because again, I keep talking about Trevor, but because up until the point where we'd had neither of us had any success whatsoever. We'd tried to form a group with Jeff Downes, but that wasn't very successful, and that's when I went on to do the Camera Club. And during that period when Trevor and I had agreed that we wouldn't be in a group together, we carried on writing. And we used to be in each other's pockets. We were both broke. We were kind of listening to records together. But we were also reading a lot of science fiction. And the most significant writer for us, there was a guy called Robert Silverberg, but there was a guy called J.G. Ballard, who not everybody, but a lot of people have heard of. And I think the word Ballardian has come into the English language to sort of describe a kind of dystopian near future driven by technology. And we read a book called The Sound Sweep, which put forward the premise that one day music, in fact, would no longer be audible. So it wouldn't be on the audible spectrum, the audio spectrum. It would just be something that you could feel as an emotion. And it was, the short story called The Sound Sweep was about a guy who used to go into buildings and clean extraneous sounds from the building. So in an office, like a cleaner would go into the office, but he would go with his sonovac and suck away all the sounds of the previous meeting, so that people would go into a clean room, because people would become more sensitive to residual sound. He had one job where he had to clean a cathedral, of the congregation singing, but had to be very careful up in the cloisters and the roof not to disturb the monastic chants that remained there for hundreds of years. So he had quite a specialized job, and he fell in love with an opera singer. And in this in this book, this short story, there was a company which created this subliminal music, and the composer was called Ray Alto, and he worked in a place called Video City, and actually, around thinking about it, I think Bowie used the word video in a song. It might have been on not Sound and Vision, but it was that album, I think Low. Perhaps you'll remember.
Yeah, there was one
films we saw in the video films we saw.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, that was Drive-In Saturday, wasn't it?
You've got it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
yeah. So, that was the first time you'd sort of heard it on a record, I think.
That's right. So I don't think that was Low, was it? Because that was
no, it was slightly before.
Yes,
yeah, which I think they put on. It was released as a single, but it was on Aladdin Sane, I think.
That's right. Yeah. There was
a time ago.
Yes, indeed. But I think you're right. That's the first time that word had ever been used in a song. And there was also around that time when Trevor and I were writing, there was a group called the Radio Stars. They were a famous, a local kind of pub rock band, and also a group called the Video Kings as well. So I think all of these things, including the ballad, all combined to this title, Video Killed the Radio Star, which came about after I was playing Trevor some chords, which were based on an Andrew Gold song called Lonely Boy.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember thinking, we're going to get into trouble if we say Video Killed the Radio Star. It sounds like Video Kings Radio Stars. But it was there was no need to worry about that at all, as it happened. So I think I was playing the piano and we had the line, I heard you on the wireless back in 52, which is pure nostalgia because I used to, and Trevor, we both used to listen to Radio Luxembourg in our beds.
Yeah. Fading in and out.
Yes. Yes. You so understand, Bob.
I do. I was there.
And of course, it's hard for people to imagine today how restricted it was. Pop music, it's hard to imagine how difficult it was to listen to current pop music back in the day, because the BBC, this is prior to Radio 1, the BBC only had the Light programme, and it would play kind of light music, I suppose, and The Laughing Policeman, and you were lucky if you heard a Beatles record sort of thing. And Radio Luxembourg was very influential because that was where you could really hear what was going on. It was a commercial station, broadcast from Luxembourg, hence the fading in and fading out. In fact, the signal got better as nighttime fell, which is a strange thing, atmospheric sort of occurrence. So what happened was Radio 1 came along as the answer, because the I'm digressing slightly. The pirate stations were closed down because they were deemed illegal, and Radio 1 was invented by the BBC as a new channel. All of these things, all of this that I've just been talking about, somehow informed the song Video Killed the Radio Star. There was also a bit of a hoo-ha in Fleet Street about journalists and having to use computers very, very early on. And the word new technology was being bandied about in the news. So they took the credit for your Second Symphony, rewritten for machine by new technology. It was something in the air which suggested that times were changing, and although it was the late 70s, we were somehow seeing into the future, just slightly forward. We could see the 80s coming, I think.
It was perfect timing. Was it 1980 the song came out, or the end of 79?
The song came out in 79.
Yes.
And we'd sort of started writing it a bit before then. And it... I think what really sort of cemented, if you like, its place in history, and this is to me an objective fact, is that it was the first song to be chosen to be played on MTV, which was 1982 actually. And MTV was just a genius idea because what it did was combine two favorite pastimes of American youth, if you like, which was watching television and listening to rock and roll, as they say. And so MTV put these two media together, and it just took off. It just captured the imagination, and it changed the record business, actually. Yeah.
So I guess when you wrote the song, that current zeitgeist you were both familiar with, and you were very much aware of what you were doing.
Well, no, not at all.
Oh, right. No, there's no plan.
Absolutely not. No, I mean, as I said, everything that informed the song had happened or was just happening around. We didn't know what was going to happen, but sometimes you see, I think William Burroughs had a technique. He was a sort of, I suppose, a bit of an avant-garde writer. He would every day he'd got a dictaphone and he'd record into it. He'd say something quite random into this dictaphone, and then put it away in his drawer. And then the next day, or even a week later, he'd pull it out and he'd say something else again, completely random. And at the end of a few months, he would then listen back to the whole tape and see what it said. And he said it started to predict the future. And he said, the future leaks through. So we didn't know any of this stuff at all. No. But somehow I do sometimes think there's a supernatural quality within music and songwriting.
Yeah, no, I remember it at the time, and it did seem to sort of capture the moment particularly well. And I guess now we've come along another 45 years, and we've got AI and all the rest of it, and lots of new technology. Do you see parallels with it again?
Yes, I do. I really do. I remember about 20 years ago, there was, and I can't believe I'm saying 20 years ago, there was a bit of a buzz about virtual artists, and it was all the rage. It was like, oh yeah, they're going to make virtual pop singers and all the rest of it. And I tried to make one as well, and it was a disaster. It was a Frankenstein monster, basically. And it was like, oh god, I'm dabbling in forces unseen here. It's going to turn against me. It's a sort of Promethean sort of vibe, and I tried to make a virtual pop singer, and it didn't work at all. And I kind of abandoned it, but I've never forgotten about it.
How did you make it?
Well, briefly, we had a Japanese girl who was our model. We scanned her with a very primitive system, a 3D scanner, which basically required something like 36 cameras. It was with a company called Createch based at Ealing Studios, and they were trying to do this sort of thing. They were trying to make avatars. This is 20 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And it's like somebody said, it's like trying to make the film, but you haven't quite finished making you still haven't built the camera. So you can see the vision and all the rest of it, but the technology just simply wasn't there. So fast forward to what you've just said, Bob, about AI. All of this is so possible now, and I think it's hard to overestimate. Is that the right word? All right, we shouldn't underestimate what's happening with AI. I don't think. No. I think if we try and sort of brush it under the carpet or say, "Oh, I'm not interested in AI," then you're missing the point. It's going to be so profound. And by the way, I'm welcoming it because I'm very interested in audio-visual product and always have been. I've always worked with animation, and I love working with pictures and putting sound to pictures. And I still like the idea of the virtual pop star, although that's developed very differently in my head now. So AI, I think, is going to be the most incredible tool. But of course, it's going to disrupt, and that's an overused word, but it is really going to disrupt a lot of industry and a lot of people's jobs. I mean, for example, somebody I know of has spent all their life learning how to be an interpreter so they can speak 8 languages, and they've studied very hard to be able to do this. But obviously now there's just simply no need to get a person to do that. It's just not, this overnight almost. That's just one example. I mean, what are your feelings about the AI?
So my feelings are that, as you say, it's inevitable. You can't sweep it under the carpet. I think, I mean, I use it for the podcast. I use it to help me make show notes. So in other words, after this interview, it'll be transcribed. And it will help me make show notes. I don't stick to them because they tend to be very salesy. So I put my own interpretation.
Yeah.
But I think with AI, you can use it more as an assistant.
Yes.
A PA, and you're there. Because, you know, if I was doing this podcast with 2 people and I had one person doing the tech and, you know, and the writing, I'd just say to them, look, here's the interview with Bruce. Can you write me some show notes, please, and summarize it? And they'd give it back to me. And yeah, we'll try. So it's a bit like that. So in theory, you know, if this podcast did have 2 people, I'd have to make that other person redundant. So I think it's inevitable. I think that in terms of on a purely mental basis, I think that it can make you become less reliant on your own intellect, and you can rely on that. So you become, I guess, lazy.
Yes,
and I think that's why a lot of us, and it's not necessarily AI, but I think that's why a lot of us suffer with memory, short-term memory, because we subcontract out a lot of our thinking. Sat nav, for example. I mean, you and I are old enough to remember, you know,
map reading,
and also, you know, you got yourself to the city, and then, excuse me, do you know where? You know, and you just stick your head out the window, and you'd get there, but you never got lost.
No.
But now, what would we do without it? You know.
No, absolutely.
So again, getting back to your question about AI, yeah, no, I think it's inevitable. We've got to go with it, but just be very careful with it and use it as a positive tool.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've tried writing songs with it, but and it's actually incredible, such fun, and very quick results. It can save a lot of time. I think that's the good thing about AI. It can save us a lot of legwork in lots of, as you've just sort of explained. But I still feel, and I don't know if I'm being a Luddite here, but I still feel that I'd be better off writing the song myself. I'm working on what would have been a musical theatre project, but possibly, I hope, will be an animation project for television, for example. And the animation is going to be done with AI. That's a no-brainer because you can do that now. And save so much time, and it's so much more cost effective. But the music, I still want to write the music. I don't want to put in a prompt and say, right, the main character's doing this. That actually doesn't interest me as much. There may be a time when I'll use it for music, but not in this instance. I'm still going to sort of stick to manual, you know. Yeah.
And on just going back to some of your collaborations, and we couldn't possibly talk about all of the collaborations you made because you made such a lot. But I'm very keen to talk about the one that you did with Grace Jones.
Oh yeah.
Could you just tell us a bit about how that came about and what songs you wrote?
Yeah, she's one hell of a character, and actually talk about being lazy. With my camera club project, I was very much the sort of front person, you know, and I had problems with the record label. It was all very Spinal Tap, actually, in the end. Very sad. So putting this record out has been quite cathartic, I must say. What I found with Grace was that she is just a total artist. She's a kind of living performance art, if you like, and she's got there's so much direction with her that I became slightly lazy. I thought, well, actually, I don't know if I can. I'm not sure I've got the, you know, when I look at Grace, I think she's a true artist. And I'd actually tried to write for her before I met her. I wrote a song called Man of War, which I thought would be a good title for her, and even rang the record label. I said, "Has Grace Jones ever recorded a song called Man of War?" Because I thought she must. It sounds like she's already written it, recorded it, or whatever. So she was on my radar quite early on, and basically the way it came about was that Trevor was producing Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and they needed a new single. And could I write a song for Frankie Goes to Hollywood? And so a friend of mine, Simon Darlow, and we wrote Slave to the Rhythm for Frankie Goes to Hollywood and submitted it. And Trevor liked it. He said, I like it, he said, but of course it'll have to be done properly, he said. So off he went into the studio to try and record this song with Frankie. And Frankie, they didn't really want to do it. They didn't really want to do a cover because, Holly had written these fabulous singles. They'd both gone to #1. Why would he work with a song by a couple of songwriters who he didn't really know? So it never took off. But the title kind of remained. And Chris Blackwell, who was the head of Island Records, still had Grace Jones signed to his label, but she was about to leave and go to EMI. And anyway, to cut a long story short, Chris said, "Look, Trevor, this is a really good title. Why don't you do it with Grace?" So that's what happened.
Okay.
So we went into the studio and she recorded this version of the song, which we'd written for Frankie. And it sounded great, but Trevor wasn't happy, and the Blackwell thought that it could be better. So we really, to cut a long story short, we spent the next 9 months re-recording this song over and over again to get the kind of ultimate version, as it were.
Yeah.
And that's how I ended up working with Grace. And while we were on those sessions, she and I spontaneously began writing together. We couldn't use that material for this project, which by the way, all the different versions of Slave to the Rhythm that Grace recorded were then turned into an album. So it worked out quite well. But then she then transitioned to, she left Ireland and went to EMI, and I had the wonderful experience of working with her on her next album. And she, by the way, she is a fantastic lyricist. She's a really good lyric writer.
Oh, so she was doing the lyrics while you were doing the music?
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, it was a very much that. It was entirely that. And by then I was programming. I'd got a MIDI rig, which is musical instrument digital interface, which means you can hook up lots of keyboards. And it was pre-computer, but I had a little sequencer, a Roland MSQ 700, which you could record sequences on and quantize, crucially. And TR-808 was the sort of basis.
That was a big one, wasn't it?
It was fabulous machine, very African.
You've written some fantastic tunes. I mean, just Slave to the Rhythm, Video Killed the Radio Star. What other songs would listeners would have heard, but perhaps didn't know that it was yourself that wrote the tunes?
Well, I've got a list of sort of 20th century household names that have recorded my songs, and. But of course, the only one that anyone really knows is Video, and to some extent Slave to the Rhythm. Although if you're in Australia, there's a guy called John Farnham who recorded a song that I wrote with Andy Hill, who was famously Bucks Fizz's writer and producer.
Oh, yeah.
And he had a lot of hits with a guy called Pete Sinfield. Pete Sinfield, incidentally, wrote the lyrics for 21st Century Schizoid Man by King Crimson.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
He was one of these guys, just does lyrics. That's it.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a song called Two Strong Hearts with Andy Hill. There was a huge hit in Australia and continues to be one of those songs that gets requested. And I think John Farnham went on to do it with Olivia Newton-John. I'm quite proud of that song. But it's never been a hit over here. It's mainly been a huge Australian phenomena, and
I'd like to talk about some of your later projects, Bruce, particularly the Radio Science Orchestra.
Right.
And also, when I was doing some research, and I hope I pronounce it right, you were using an instrument called a theremin.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Can you tell us about that, please?
Yes. Well, the official line really with the theremin is that it was invented in 1920 by a Russian inventor he'd previously been in the revolution as a member of the radio battalion, and he lived in Moscow, and he was fascinated with electronics, and I think he was a cello player as well, or viola.
Right.
So he was a trained musician.
Yes.
And he invented this instrument, which is it uses a technique or a process known as space control, which means that you can play the instrument without actually touching it. It has two antennae typically, or antennas if you're in America. And one on the left controls the volume, and the one on the right controls the pitch. So the combination of moving your left and right hands provides us a monophonic signal, which can be played, which can basically generate notes across a number of octaves. It's a kind of spooky sound. Sounds sort of woo, 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 a bit ghostly, which is interesting. It makes you wonder why ghosts go woo, woo. And there's a connection there probably. And ethereal is probably a good word to describe the sound. And it typically, people think that the sound on Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys is a theremin. It is actually a version of the theremin. So that's the sound of it. People think that the Doctor Who theme was played on the theremin, but it wasn't. That was a combination of ex-military test equipment and tape manipulation. There is a program called Midsummer Murders, which you may be familiar with, which the theme song does use a theremin.
So most listeners would be familiar with that.
So I think that's probably where we can hear it. We, funnily enough, can also hear it on "Whole Lotta Love" by Led Zeppelin, which we mentioned earlier. Jimmy Page had built a single antenna theremin, which he'd play with his guitar. So the volume was fixed, and he would move his guitar to and from the antenna. This single looks like a big kind of radio aerial, and create weird notes. That obviously isn't a precision instrument, but it was very effective.
I never saw Led Zeppelin live, but I think he had that on the film, The Song Remains the Same.
Oh, okay. I must check that out, actually, because there's a new film, isn't there, Becoming Led Zeppelin, which apparently
Netflix,
people are saying is very good. I need to see that. So that's the instrument, and it sort of manifests in multiple different forms. I mean, there are so many different models of theremin because people are building their own now. Anyway, I was trying to get hold of one in the early 90s. It was very difficult. There were none in England. Well, I say none. There were two RCA theremins because the Radio Corporation of America signed Leon Theremin up because he'd moved to America in the late 20s from Russia. And by the way, he was allowed to do that because he was spying for Russia. He was a scientist.
Oh, right.
He went over to America, to New York, on a PR trip, basically, and kind of infiltrated American high society. So anyway, RCA decided to build a number of these instruments, and a few of them remain. And there were two in London in 1993, both owned by a guy who used to work at the Science Museum. And he brought one over to my studio to show it to me. And it's like a big wooden, kind of dark wood thing with these aerials. It looks like Flash Gordon's drinks cabinet, basically. and it just sounded fantastic. It was such
Yeah.
a buzz to play it.
It was ahead of its time then, wasn't it, if it was developed in the 1920s?
Completely. I mean, Leon Theremin, he's almost like a Tesla figure. He kind of that's Nikola Tesla. He kind of was one of those people that invented the modern world. There's a kind of almost an age, there's a time period. I think somewhere from the late 1800s into the early 1900s where everything gets invented. A friend of mine, Ken Hollings, he's a writer, calls it the founding age. So we see this, telephones, television, electronic musical instruments, cinema, aeroplanes, cars, all of this stuff happened in a kind of 40 to 50 year period.
It was amazing, wasn't it?
It is. It's incredible when you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you say it's ahead of its time. Absolutely. And any door that you walk up to that opens now, any automatic door is all based on the principles that Leon Theremin's space control, emotion sensor, basically. And he invented innumerable things which are now incorporated into modern life.
And you use this quite a lot with the Radio Science Orchestra, do you?
Yes, absolutely. The Radio Science Orchestra is, in fact, its sort of foundation was the fact that it used the theremin. And I didn't know. I came up with the name way before the band existed. And then we got a theremin, and I hadn't realized that it's actually using radio technology. So the name's kind of apt. And I started out by playing the theremin myself and playing all the parts myself, sing the theme tune, write the theme tune, But actually, I then realized that, again, I'm quite limited as a player. I could get by. But we have a player currently in the group called Charlie Draper, who is a virtuoso. And there's a handful of virtuoso players in the world, and he's one of them. So I leave all the difficult stuff to him.
And are you doing much? Have you got much coming up? Any gigs?
Well, we did. Actually, our last gig it's some time ago now. It's over a year ago. We played at the National Space Centre in Leicester. They have the Patrick Moore Planetarium there, and we basically designed a show for them called Extraterrestrial Voyage, and we performed inside the dome. So we created footage, and they gave us access to their planetarium library, so we could see amazing projections while we played inside the dome. And that's something we're going to be developing.
And how many members have you got in the band?
Well, it varies, but we have a basic core of, bass drums, keyboards, electronics, theremin, harp, and, we've also got a couple of technical guys on stage, and we create our own footage and so forth. So it can vary because occasionally we've added a few strings to the ensemble. So it's 6 or 7 of us probably on stage, and it's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work.
It sounds like it. Yeah. Have you got any gigs coming up?
Well, this is what we're working on. We've decided what generally happens is we're very reactive. As in, Sammy Khan was a great lyricist, and he said, "So, Sammy, somebody said, Sammy, what comes first, the lyrics or the music?" And he said, "The phone call." So we're a bit like that. We wait for the phone call, and then we spring into action. But invariably, we spend ages doing all the preparation, do the gig, and then it tends to stop. The exception to that was for the moon landing anniversary in 2019, the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. We did a mini tour of England, which was great. But the Space Centre gig was quite seminal. So we're thinking of creating a show that can travel with or without us. to other planetaria.
I'll have to look out for that.
That's the plan. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So, you've spent your life in the music industry, Bruce. If we've got any listeners who would like to become involved in the music industry in whatever way, what advice would you give them?
Probably two bits of advice. One, get a manager. Someone that can help organize things for you. And two, get a good lawyer so that you don't end up signing ridiculously bad deals, which we've all done. So I really think that would be the best bit of advice I could give. And obviously, sorry to interrupt. And obviously, you've got to love it.
Yes, I was going to say that. And do you think it's harder now for people to make it in the music industry than it was 40 or 50 years ago?
Again, that's a very difficult question. Not necessarily. It's always been really hard. And there have always been filters. When I started, you had to have musicians, like we discussed. Then you have to have a studio, and then you got to get a label, this, that, and the other. It was very difficult to get those things in place. Whereas now anybody can release any piece of music at any time. In fact, I understand the latest statistic is that it's approximately 100,000 songs are being uploaded every day on Spotify. Wow. Every day.
Every day.
Yes. Last year it was slightly more. It was like 105,000. I think this year it's just under 100. So it's very easy to make music now, technologically. And it's just how do you get heard above the noise? So it's probably about the same. It's, do you know what I mean? It's probably
challenges in different ways, I guess.
It's just different challenges. Yeah. I think it's about the same. A lot of luck, a lot of devotion is required.
We've spoken about the current project with the Radio Science Orchestra, but what other projects and work are you working on at the moment, Bruce?
I mentioned the musical, which is something very close to my heart. So that's Radio Science will move forward through the medium of planetariums. Is it planetaria? And those wheels are in motion now. The musical is about robots, and I don't want to get into too much detail or talk about it too much, but that's my primary preoccupation at the moment. It involves our famous song and some of the other songs from the catalogue, conveniently, but they're not gratuitous. They genuinely fit the project. So that's really taking up quite a lot of my time at the moment. And I also have a compilation album called Bruce Woolley and the Camera Club, The Definitive Anthology, 1977 to 1981, which is a 3 CD set containing 69 tracks from back in the day. I just thought I'd give that a plug.
Yeah, no, sure. I was going to ask you about that. How did that come about? Because it took a while to get, I believe.
Yes.
Come out.
Well, I've known Cherry Red, who are a most splendid record label, and they specialise in what has now become a niche product, which is CDs and vinyl. And they're very good at putting compilations of historic music together, and they do new music as well. But their speciality is putting these luxurious box sets together. And so they got in touch and said, "Look, we'd like to do something. Could we look at the whole that sort of window of late 70s, early 80s music that you did? Could we put that onto one record?" Well, it's 3 records actually. So it's my original album, English Garden, which was the UK release, plus an unreleased album, which I've rather niftily called Polaroid Snapshots in Sound, or Snapshots of Sound. And then we found some live tapes as well, which is very exciting. And we've got all the permissions, and we've remastered, remixed. It's been an absolute labour of love. There are a lot of legal issues as well. I've been, if you like, battling away with CBS, which then became Sony, for about 40 years. And we only just resolved everything, literally everything. Yeah, but these things happen, those, I said, those deals, hey, get a good lawyer,
Yeah.
But it's all resolved now.
Yeah. And where and is that on vinyl as well?
It will be. At the moment, it's only available on CD. It's not on Spotify yet, but the plan is that this summer we'll release everything on Spotify and all the other digital platforms. But Cherry Red wanted an exclusive, so this stuff's coming out, most of it, for the first time. And they worked on the principle that if you want to hear these tracks, then please buy the record. And so you just go to the Cherry Red website and order the record. There you go.
Well, we'll put the link to Cherry Web on the show notes of the podcast.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you.
Yeah, and where can people find out more about your work, Bruce?
Well, I've got a website, brucewoolleyhq.com, and there's a Radio Science Orchestra website, and I think probably. If I need to know anything, I generally just Google myself to find out what I'm doing.
Well, it's been great talking to you, Bruce. Thank you ever so much for coming on the show. It's been really great to hear about your much varied career in the music industry. And we've just sort of touched on some of those achievements, which are absolutely fantastic. And it's been great having you on. So thank you very much, Bruce.
Well, Bob, thank you. It's really been my pleasure. It's so good to meet you, and I hope we'll meet in real life one day.